So, for this next segment, we are talking about boycotts, which are in some ways kind of related to our tip for good in the difference between
very much, very
advocacy and virtue signaling. Yeah, we're going to get into it. We're going to talk a little bit about like what they are and what makes for a successful boycott and kind of why people boycott and we'll just get into it.
So something that is commonly said, usually by the other side when their opponents are doing a boycott, is that boycotts never work.
Yeah.
That if anything, you're helping the image, you're helping the product or whatever. And what's usually said by people that are pro boycott is, well, I mean, look at times in history in which boycotts have been successful.
Sure.
And the most famous example that they often point to is, of course, the Montgomery bus boycott during the Civil Rights Movement.
Sure.
So I want to start out by talking a little bit about that. Talking a little bit about the Montgomery bus boycotts and why that was such a monumentally successful boycott and why it actually did lead to change. And the reason why I want to start out establishing that is if we understand why that succeeded, then maybe we can understand, number one, how to make sure boycotts that we might participate in the future actually succeed. Number two, what instances a boycott will actually be successful. And number three, learning some cool historical facts.
Dope.
So the story that is often sold to us about the Montgomery bus boycott is in the heat of the moment, there was this woman named Rosa Parks who was asked to give up her seat on the bus, and she was tired, and she decided, you know what, I don't feel like it, and then she got arrested. And that one moment, that one instance of this person refusing to give up their seat on the bus sparked an entire boycott that was just spontaneous, completely unplanned, and would eventually lead to the integration of the buses in the Montgomery system. There's no more. This is the white section. This is the black section. It's now integrated. And the reason why that worked so well is because black people were a huge source of income for those buses, and they could not afford to keep running without that extra revenue. So that's usually the story that's
inspirational. Yeah,
it's
really
inspirational.
Yeah. It's not going to set us up well for a good boycott, though.
Yeah. It also leaves out a lot of things. And when I say that is in no way to undermine Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
But it's to point out the fact that she was a part of a larger movement of organizers that did a lot of work to set this up and to make this successful. First off, she wasn't even the first black woman to refuse to give up her seat on the bus and get arrested. In fact, months before her, there was this young woman named Claudette Colvin that also refused to give up her seat and was arrested. Now, she wasn't used as the face of the movement because she had what they referred to in those days as a reputation. She was younger. She was darker skinned. And, she wasn't as highly established as the nice, calm, gentle church lady that Rosa Parks did. In fact, there are various cases of women getting arrested for refusing to give up their seat on the bus in Montgomery going back to the 1940s. Like, there were multiple instances of that happening. And in fact, multiple lawsuits from various women for the Montgomery system. The local civil rights chapters and the local church leaders were waiting for some type of spark to ignite a boycott that they had basically already planned on having. And Rosa Parks was the perfect symbol of that.
Yes. Yeah.
And part of that organization was, in order to get to work, they would basically organize carpools with each other. The church, the black church leaders and the civil rights activists would organize carpools so that they could still get to work. They would help each other out. They worked as a community in order to make it so they could still go on living their life without the buses, so they could sustain the boycott. But the buses would not be getting their business.
Mm-hmm.
And that right there is what led to the success of it, because it was this massive, organized, and planned effort by brilliant people. It wasn't spontaneous. It really just wasn't. I know that makes a good story, but that's just not what happened.
Yeah. And it would be almost impossible for something like that to be spontaneous and for it to work. Because I think that's one of the big challenges of boycotts in general, is that they do cost. They are challenging. They force us to give things up, or to, like in the case of like boycotting like Walmart, for example, they force you to drive further for your goods or pay more for the things you need in your life. Same with Amazon. Like, it actually is not something that's free, which means that you either have to be somewhat privileged to participate, or you have to be supported to make it sustainable. And the sustainability is a key part of exerting that influence. It's something that you have to, and without planning, you can't necessarily make it sustainable and widespread.
Yeah. 100%. So I think that a lot of that demonstrates lessons that are not learned today by modern boycotts. And I think that's why a lot of modern boycotts have not really been that successful. Now, one of the things to also realize is that in the case of the Montgomery bus boycott, they were boycotting public transportation. They weren't boycotting a corporation. They were boycotting public transportation, which means that it was a government institution that was suffering because of what they were doing. And it had to be a government institution that would then make changes to integrate buses in Montgomery. Nowadays, a lot of the boycotts that we see are done on these massive corporations. What often drives it is this idea of, if I can't, it's this feeling of, if I can't vote in an election anytime soon, because like elections only happen once a year. I mean, if you're lucky, if you're in Virginia, they happen once a year. If you're in other states, they might happen once every other year. But money is something that you use every day. And the idea is that's something that you can use in order to vote every single day. So it makes people feel like they have some measure of agency over the practices of corporations or individuals. And it makes people feel like they can make a difference in that way. And I would just like to say, I don't necessarily fault people for feeling that way. And in fact, I'm not even going to say that boycotting is useless or that you should never boycott, even that I don't boycott. There are several organizations that I do boycott that I refuse to go to. I don't go to Hobby Lobby because of the court case a few years ago where they basically used religious justification in order to get out of paying for the insurance on certain contraceptives that weren't even abortion. I think that was imposing religious views on their employees. I boycott Exxon because in the 70s, they discovered climate change and then they covered it up. And not to mention the Alaskan oil spill. I try to avoid BP because of the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. I boycott Chick-fil-A because when I was in high school, they decided to make it a political statement to go eat there. And I was like, all right, if you're going to make it a political statement against gay people to eat there, then I'm not going to eat there. Now, all of that being said, I don't pretend that me not going to those places makes a difference.
Yes. Yeah.
It doesn't.
Yeah. I think there's a few interesting things going on when we think about this. Like, one, there's to your point, like our individual kind of moral feelings about contributing money to the bottom line of organizations that have practices we disagree with. Yeah. And I think this is sometimes where there's a lot of squishiness in this area, because like, to your point, like, you're not buying a Chick-fil-A sandwich, or say you fucking love Chick-fil-A and you go once a month. That's no money to them.
Yeah.
And so like, that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. It doesn't mean it's not worthwhile for you to do, and you shouldn't feel, good about making that choice. But you should understand like what it's doing. And I think that's important with regard to the sustainability of boycotts themselves, because
Yeah.
it's not really a reasonable, like, it's one thing to say no Chick-fil-A. It's one thing to say even like no fast food maybe. But like for
Yeah.
a lot of people, like, they're like, food's fucking expensive. And like to say, you should boycott anybody that pays minimum wage to their employees, that would be impossible.
Yeah.
Even though that's something that we would push for. And so like I think like, that is one of the challenges here, is that boycotts, if we expect them to have impacts, should be strategic. Because if they're not strategic, we would just be impacting ourselves and our own lives without the intended effects. Now, if you're doing it for personal moral reasons, go for it. That was me when I was like, there was a period of a couple of years where I like wasn't eating meat at all. And this was related to like primarily to climate change and stuff like that. And my will has like shattered since then, and I eat meat periodically now. But again, I was under no delusion that me not eating meat would have an actual practical effect. But at the same time, like, I didn't want to give in to the idea that just because I'm part of a group of people that would all need to change their behavior in order to affect change, didn't mean that each of us individually would have to change our behavior in order to affect change.
Yeah.
So a good boycott should be strategic, and that does require all of us, to participate. And so we should be thoughtful about where we dedicate our boycott energy if we're trying to make that impact. The other thing is, one study I was reading about boycotts found, as they studied a bunch of boycotts and were looking at the common factors for successful boycotts in the 21st century. And the thing they found is that impacting a company's bottom line was actually not the most important factor to causing them to change their behavior. The biggest thing was getting attention that made them feel like you were impacting their reputation with the public. Because like ultimately, corporations have things that affect their bottom lines all the time. And unless you're going to get literally millions of people to change their behavior, you're not going to get a corporation like Walmart to do very much. Yeah. But if you can truly get, if you can be like, look at what Walmart's doing and how they're using child labor, and we should all go shop at Target instead. And Walmart is a bunch of evil, greedy people for doing this, and you can make that stick. That can be a big difference. That can really drive change. And so, like, I think there's a lot of strategy to boycotts that make them effective, and we should be thoughtful about how we participate in them and how we advocate for them. But I don't think we should necessarily be like blaming people for not making any individual personal moral choice about which products or services they boycott, especially because ultimately the other avenue for this advocacy is policy change. Yes. And holding our elected officials responsible for doing their jobs of making us not have to exert our secondary, influence on these huge organizations, but rather represent our interests directly. That is to the degree that we can, influence them directly in their policy, that's like a very powerful tool that we should use.
Yeah. It's oftentimes when it comes to boycotts, shaming people into a boycott is virtue signaling.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I can guarantee you that I can point to at least 7 different products that you buy that were unethically sourced.
Totally.
I mean, hell, right now I'm talking to I'm recording this on a MacBook, which was made in factories in China, probably by various different children that are in borderline slave conditions. I'm wearing a shirt that I'm sure was made in some other country where they lock children in a sweatshop and force them to work long hours.
Yeah.
And that's horrible. And that's something that we should try to fight against. But at the end of the day, one individual's choice to not buy an item, number one, it doesn't mean they don't care. But number two, it's not going to make a difference. What's going to make a difference is policy.
Yeah.
Some type of policy that makes it so that you're not allowed to do business in the United States if you subject your workers to these types of conditions, or say to other countries, our companies are not going to be allowed to buy from you unless you change your laws, unless your workers are put in better conditions. To Michael's point about minimum wage, companies that pay their employees the federal minimum wage, which is still $7.25 an hour. The way that you change that is by raising the fucking minimum wage.
Yeah. Yep.
Companies that exploit their workers by not giving them the benefits they deserve, you use policy in order to make sure they get those benefits in the first place. That's how you actually make change. When we're talking about boycotts related to, hell, I'll even call myself out when it comes to Chick-fil-A. When it comes to the fact that I don't eat at Chick-fil-A, that doesn't help the fact that marriage equality was illegal. What helped the fact that marriage equality was illegal, what eventually led to it becoming legalized, was massive organizational efforts. All right, I did a summer internship for the Human Rights Campaign. That had much more impact in that one summer than I've had my entire life of not eating Chick-fil-A. And I recognize that.
Yeah.
Your vote plays an important role. The people that you choose to vote for, whether or not they have the best interests of you or the people you care about in mind, that makes an impact. But the problem is shaming people into a boycott and using that to impugn their own virtue. It kind of misses the point of collective action. It kind of makes it so that you're kind of accepting the premise that there is ethical consumption under our current system.
Yeah.
And if you just make individual choices, on an individual level, if you remain individualistic, then you can solve the problems in our country. But that's just not true. That's just not the case. I'll give you an example. And in fact, I'll give you two examples from, two different sides. Let's look at the trans issue. All right. There was a massive push to do a boycott of Hogwarts Legacy, which was a video game that was made this year. And obviously it takes place in the universe of Harry Potter, in which you play as a student going to Hogwarts. There was this massive push by online activists to boycott this game. You know what happened? It is the #1 best-selling game of 2023. The #1 best-selling game of 2023. Beating out Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, which reviews were...
That was a huge release. Yeah, that was...
It was a huge release.
Yeah.
Universally, people loved it. The re-release of Resident Evil 4, which Resident Evil 4, like the original Resident Evil 4, was a genre-defining game. Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I played the first of the series. I haven't played that one yet. And it was basically a Souls-like Star Wars game. And it was fucking incredible. It was amazing. And Hogwarts Legacy beat it.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, I played Hogwarts Legacy. It was good. It was not best-selling video game of the year.
Yeah.
Good. And in fact, I'm not alone in believing that, because according to like they collect data on what percentage of players have achieved certain achievements within the game, and the achievement for defeating the final boss, which means you've beaten the game, is 30%. Only 30% of players of Hogwarts Legacy actually beat the game. Now, there have been other games that where the number that are really prominent games that are really universally agreed upon great games, like Red Dead Redemption 2 and The Witcher 3, where like the number is like 25%, but those games are like a million
impossibly
hours.
hard. Yeah.
No, not impossibly hard,
see.
just impossibly long.
Oh.
Like Red Dead Redemption 2 is like, I'm pretty sure it has the longest main storyline of any video game ever. I mean, literally I beat what I thought was the main story, and the epilogue is literally just like 40 more hours of game.
Oh my god.
The fucking epilogue. So yeah, of course that number is going to be lower for those games. Hogwarts Legacy is not as long of a game. I mean, it's a fairly long game, but it's not that long of a game. So like, people might have enjoyed it a little bit, but like, they did not enjoy it best-selling video game of the year.
Sure. Yeah.
And
I think
what
that goes back to like making your point of your boycott clear and reputation impacting, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to, like, ultimately a boycott has to have a social reputational impact that is pretty consistently unidirectional for it to work. If there's a big backlash like there was with Hogwarts Legacy, or like getting a bunch of extra attention over the boycott, like that's a problem, because ultimately the boycott drew attention but didn't draw exclusively bad attention. And that's ultimately the goal of the boycott.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the other thing. Like, the goal of the boycott should be clearly defined. Like, what are you trying to do?
Yeah.
Are you trying to punish JKR? Are you hoping that she's going to change her mind? Because I mean, I hate to say this, but like, look, I have very strong, passionate feelings of vitriol towards JKR, partially because she wrote a series that was defining for my childhood. Like, she wrote this series that is perfect for the type of person who feels out of place when growing up, who feels, like a misfit growing up. Honestly, the perfect fucking story for somebody who might be, say, I don't know, struggling with gender identity, struggling with being ostracized because of their gender identity. And the fact that she helped to instill those values of tolerance into me with her books, and then turns around and becomes this total fucking bigot. Like, I fucking hate her for that. But you know what? If tomorrow she tweeted and said, you know what? I was wrong about trans people. I apologize. I was terrible. I should not have done that. I should not have said any of that stuff. I have changed my mind. You know what would actually change? Bugger all. Because legislation is still being proposed in state after state after state after state to limit access to life-saving healthcare for both children and adults all across the United States. Trans people are still oppressed all around the world through various different levels. All right? There is still a much too high rate of suicidal ideation amongst trans youth that must be addressed, that is not being addressed. And also, there are still prominent Republican candidates for president that are actively advocating for national bans on trans-affirming healthcare. That makes a difference. And look, if people decided to not play or buy Hogwarts Legacy because, they were trying to take a moral stance, I don't fault them for that at all. But you also need to be clear about what you're actually trying to achieve. The things that make an impact are those pieces of legislation that you either fight to overturn if they're bad, or you fight to bring forth if they are good. And in fact, we saw another example on the other side of this with Bud Light, where they took a fucking picture of a trans person. Like, it wasn't even a full video game. They took a picture of a trans person, and a bunch of right-wingers flipped out and tried to do a boycott. Yeah. And on the surface, it might seem like that boycott was successful. But here's the thing. Number one, like, on the side of it being successful, between April and June, the revenue dropped 10.5% compared to last year in the United States. But here's the other thing. In other parts of the world, it actually increased. And Anheuser-Busch is actually not even based in the United States. All right? Anheuser-Busch is based in Belgium. So around the world, they actually saw an increase of sales. And in fact, at this point, their sales are actually recovering. Because all of the hype about it eventually died down because, eventually people just stopped giving a shit. Yeah. Like, people are going to fall back into their own ways. And in fact, the company has forecasted that by the end of the year, they're actually expecting a profit growth of 8%. So it was temporarily successful, but at the end of the day, it didn't end up being that successful.
But also, like, the point was not clear. That's the other thing.
The point wasn't clear.
It was not clear at any point what anybody was trying to accomplish. And this is the problem with totally disorganized, quote unquote, movements. In this case, it wasn't a movement. It was just a bunch of disorganized people raging, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem. It's not going to, like, what are they going to do? Apologize? Like, there's no objective. There's no change in behavior that's the goal. And so, like, and without that, all you're doing is denying yourself a watery cold beer.
Yeah. And also, you kind of turn people against you, because people look at you freaking out over a fucking picture.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're just like, what the fuck are these people doing?
Yeah, you really lose credibility for sure.
Yeah. Well, here's what I would say about boycotts, because I think that there's multiple levels of analysis that we have to consider. There's the personal moral level, and there's the functional level.
Yeah. Yep.
On a personal moral level, I don't think that people should necessarily be judged for what they boycott. You know, I would say that if someone came up to me and said, I don't drink Bud because, you know, I hate trans people. Like, yeah, of course I'm going to judge you for that.
Yeah, but you
know?
judge them not because they don't drink Bud Light. I don't really drink Bud Light, but it's not because, but you judge them because they hate trans people. And that's why they don't drink Bud Light.
Exactly. You know, I don't drink Bud Light. The reason for that is because Bud Light was responsible for the worst night of my entire life, which, by the way, Michael was there for.
Yeah.
And every time I see a Bud Light can, I'm reminded of that night, and it makes me want to vomit. And so I cannot ever bring myself to drink it again, which isn't Bud Light's fault.
No. Yeah, exactly.
It's my fault. It's my fault for being a dumbass. But, like, you know, I don't judge people for the products they refuse to buy. I judge people for what they actually do believe and the things that they do that have a measurable impact. Votes have a measurable impact. Protests have a measurable impact. Hell, even conversations about issues. Having conversations about issues in which you try to educate people or argue with people one at a time, even that has an impact. But unfortunately, in our capitalist system, boycotts don't always have an impact. So on a moral level, I think that it's okay for people to have certain products that they're like, you know what? It makes me feel better to not participate in that particular product. You know, I have things that I will continue to boycott for my own personal reasons, while also recognizing that there are things that there are companies that probably do far more evil that I still buy from, that I still do business with. But at the end of the day, I think that the only person that can make that decision is you. On a functionalist level, I would say that you cannot have spontaneous boycotts.
Yeah.
First off, if you're going to have a successful boycott, you have to define what it is you're actually trying to achieve. Like, if it's, I just want these people to apologize. I mean,
kind of a waste of a boycott, but
it's kind of a waste of a boycott.
You know what you're doing.
But yeah, at least you know. I mean, an apology is not necessarily going to change policy, but, like, you know, whatever. I am doing this because I'm trying to make sure that this company stops doing this specific practice that I don't like. You know, that can have an impact. In fact, there are many instances in which politicians, you know, such as Bernie Sanders, have actually put pressure campaigns on companies in order to change policies. And for the sake of their reputation, because of the fear of a boycott, they did.
Yep.
Amazon comes to mind.
Yeah.
The fact that Amazon raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour when Bernie Sanders did this major pressure campaign on them. You know, to Michael's point, it's not always just about the bottom line. It's about the reputation.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, if you threaten the reputation of a company and thus create the threat of a boycott, then that could actually make them change the way that they go about doing something to, you know,
that's leverage.
That's leverage.
That's leverage. Ultimately, like, you're not going to be able to compete with the fact that labor costs 10 cents an hour in China, right? Versus 7.25 in the US. You're not going to be able to compete that on the bottom line. There's almost no way you're going to make that cost up. But if you can get leverage by affecting the reputation, that's where you can make a big difference. And so, like, that strategy makes all the difference.